Um, so I'll speak today on the ontological framework of Indian knowledge systems. But this topic is too vast to cover in one lecture. This would be like a semester-long course, basically. So what I've decided to do is restrict myself to one Indian knowledge system, a very important one, the knowledge system of Vedanta, and try to explain not the ontological framework of Vedanta, but the many ontological frameworks of Vedanta in capsule form. So that's what I'll try to do. So let's begin by first distinguishing. The term Vedanta is used in many different ways, in different contexts, and many people use it without actually defining what they mean by it. So let's first distinguish three meanings of the term Vedanta. First and foremost, Vedanta means the Upanishads themselves, because Vedanta in its etymological sense means the culmination of the Vedas. Culmination, and the Upanishads are the culminating portion of the Vedas. So in its primary sense, Vedanta means the Upanishads. Secondarily, Vedanta often means the Prasthanatraya, the three scriptural pillars of Vedanta, which are the three texts, Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, and Brahma Sutra. So that's a slightly broader understanding of the term Vedanta, because it encompasses two other scriptures, Gita and Brahma Sutra, as well as Upanishads. And the third and final meaning of Vedanta is that Vedanta can refer to any one of the many philosophical schools of Vedanta. And we'll be discussing some of these shortly, but they include Advaita Vedanta, Vishishtadvaita Vedanta, Dvaita Vedanta, and Bheda Veda Vedanta, all of which accept the authority of the Prasthanatraya, these three scriptural pillars mentioned in the second point. So Vedanta could refer to any of these philosophical schools of Vedanta. The problem is that when many people refer to Vedanta, they often mean Advaita Vedanta, which is just one school of Vedanta, and that's a serious mistake. So we should try to avoid making the mistake of equating Vedanta with Advaita Vedanta. In fact, Vedanta means the Upanishad, or a little bit more broadly, the Prasthanatraya, or means any one of the many philosophical schools of Vedanta, not just Advaita Vedanta. So this is just an overview of the different meanings of the term Vedanta. Now, for the remainder of the lecture, I wanted to discuss some of the main doctrines of the major schools of Vedanta philosophy. The first and most well-known school is Advaita Vedanta. The first known exponent of Advaita Vedanta with texts that are still available is Gaudapada. He wrote the Mandukya Karika. He is considered traditionally to be the guru of Shankara. And Shankaracharya, of course, the great 8th century Advaita Vedantin who wrote Sanskrit commentaries on the Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, and Brahma Sutra, and wrote a separate work called Upadesha Stasri. So that's the first school, Advaita Vedanta. Second school is called Vishishtadvaita Vedanta. It's otherwise known as Sri Vaishnava, the Sri Vaishnava school. This is a school founded by Ramanuja, the great Bhakti philosopher. Third school of Vedanta, Madhva or Dvaita Vedanta. Sometimes followers of Madhva school don't like to be labeled Dvaita, so it's better to just call it Madhva Vedanta. Madhva just means the school founded by Madhva. Okay? And fourth, Bheda Veda Vedanta. One of the first known exponents of Bheda Veda Vedanta was Bhartri Prapancha, because even Shankara in his commentaries refers to Bhartri Prapancha as an earlier Vedantin. And Shankara is arguing with him and disagreeing with his views. But that shows that Bheda Veda Vedanta is a very old school of Vedanta. Even older than Advaita Vedanta, it seems to be. And Bheda Veda Vedanta itself has many sub-schools. And I'm just going to mention 4 of the main ones. So the first is called Aupadika Bheda Veda. This is a school founded by Bhaskara, who is considered to be a contemporary of Shankara in the 8th century. Second, Swabhavika Bheda Veda, which is a school founded by Nimbarka. This is a Vaishnava school of Bheda Veda. Achinta Bheda Veda, or otherwise known as Gaudiya Vaishnavism. This is also a Vaishnava school, but this is founded by Chaitanya, the great avatara. And finally, Shuddha Dvaita, otherwise known as Pushti Marga. This is a school founded by Vallabha, and this is also a Vaishnava school of Bheda Veda Vedanta. So this in a nutshell encompasses the different major schools within the Vedanta philosophy. And so I want to discuss some of the main doctrines of these schools and how they differ from each other. But first, let's discuss some of the commonalities. Before we go into the differences, it's important to understand, what do all of these schools of Vedanta have in common? What do they agree on? I would point to 5 fundamental commonalities. First, they all accept the authority of the Prasthanatraya. The Upanishad, Bhagavad Gita, and Brahma Sutra, for all of them, are considered authoritative. But of course, they interpret these scriptures in very different ways, depending on their philosophical frameworks, their ontological frameworks. Second, they all agree that we suffer because we are ignorant of the ultimate reality, Brahman, and of our true spiritual nature. They all agree that we're eternal souls, but exactly what the nature of that soul is, that differs from school to school. Third commonality, they all agree that we are not the ephemeral body-mind complex, but the eternal soul. Fourth, they all agree that we can gain knowledge of Brahman through spiritual practices of different sorts. For instance, the renunciation of sense pleasures, meditation, bhakti, and so on and so forth. And finally, they agree that knowledge of Brahman, the highest reality, leads to salvation, where you can understand salvation in a broad sense as freedom from rebirth and eternal bliss. This, all schools agree. That knowledge of Brahman leads to salvation. Salvation is understood as freedom from rebirth and eternal bliss. Now, if you push them, if you want more specific details on the nature of salvation, do you go to a heaven or not? Then they start disagreeing with each other again. So we'll get to that soon. Okay, so just please keep in mind these 5 commonalities before we start going into the differences among the schools. So now let's look at the first key question. What is the nature of Brahman according to the different schools of Vedanta? Advaita Vedanta is the only Vedantic school that holds that Brahman is ultimately devoid of all attributes, nirguna or nirvishesha, and non-dual. There's only one. And hence that the personal God is ultimately non-existent. So Shankaracharya distinguished 2 levels of reality. One is the empirical level of reality, vyavaharika, and the second is the paramantika, the absolute level of reality. And he said that from the absolute standpoint, from the paramantika standpoint, the only reality is non-dual Brahman, pure consciousness. And in our true nature, each of us is that pure consciousness. But from the empirical standpoint, from the vyavaharika standpoint, the personal God is real. This whole world of names and forms is real. So all of these things are real. But they're only real from the standpoint of vyavaharika reality, which is tantamount to ignorance. It's the standpoint of ignorance. Ignorance of what? Ignorance of the highest truth, which is Brahman. So long as we remain ignorant of our true nature as non-dual pure consciousness, so long can we pray to a personal God, so long can we believe that we ourselves are individual souls, separate from Brahman. But the moment we attain knowledge of non-dual pure consciousness, it turns out that all of that was untrue. There was no personal God. We were never individual souls. There was just Brahman all along. This is Shankara's standpoint. Now let's look at other schools. All of the other Vedantic schools that I mentioned in the previous slide, 2 slides ago, are theistic, which means that Brahman is conceived as personal, fundamentally personal, saguna. Saguna means endowed with attributes like omniscience, omnipotence, perfect compassion. These are the attributes of a supreme person, somebody who is supremely loving, a supreme person who responds to our prayers. So we can pray to God, God will respond to our prayers. These are not things that non-dual pure consciousness of Advaita Vedanta can do, right? Now, Vishishtadvaita, Madhva Vedanta, and many schools of Bheda maintain that Brahman is only personal, exclusively personal. These schools reject the very existence of Nirguna Brahman in Shankara's sense. They say that that doesn't exist. What Advaita Vedantins believe in simply does not exist. So that's one view. Okay, this Vishishtadvaita, Madhva Vedanta, and some schools of Bheda. But there are 2 schools of Vedanta which hold a somewhat different view. Shuddhadvaita Vedanta of Vallabha and Achinta Bheda of Chaitanya, they both hold that the ultimate reality is both Nirguna without attributes and Saguna with attributes, both impersonal and personal, but that Nirguna Brahman is only a minor aspect of the personal God Krishna. So there's a kind of hierarchy where they say that both are true, Nirguna Brahman and Saguna Brahman. But Saguna Brahman is the greater reality, and Nirguna Brahman is just a minor aspect. So according to Achinta Bheda Veda, Nirguna Brahman is Krishna's peripheral brilliance. The Sanskrit term here is Tanubha. Sometimes the term used is Pratibha, but usually it's Tanubha. In Chaitanya Charitamrita, the term is Tanubha. According to Shuddha Dvaita, Nirguna Brahman is Krishna's foot. So he uses a metaphor. And just as the foot is, one of the least important parts of the human body, Nirguna Brahman is just a minor aspect of Krishna. So Charanam. It's Krishna's Charanam. Now, one thing to notice is that both of these schools of Vedanta, Achinta Bheda Veda and Shuddha Dvaita, turn the tables on Advaita Vedanta, which privileges Nirguna Brahman over the personal God. So Shankara says Nirguna Brahman is the highest. The personal God is only true from the empirical standpoint, but from the ultimate standpoint, does not exist at all. They're saying, they reverse Shankara's scheme and say that the highest reality is Saguna Brahman. Nirguna Brahman is not false, but it's just a minor aspect of Krishna. So for many, many centuries, these different schools of Vedanta have been fighting with each other and arguing with each other and saying, we're right, you're wrong. So this has been going on for a long time. Second big question, is the world real or unreal? Advaita Vedanta is the only school of Vedanta that holds that the world does not ultimately exist. The only reality is non-dual Nirguna Brahman. All of the other Vedantic schools hold that the world is real. Vallabha's follower Giridhara, in fact, this is interesting. Actually, many people think that Vallabha himself called his school of Vedanta Shuddha Dvaita, pure non-dualism. But that's not the case. One of his followers, Giridhara, he is the one who gave the label Shuddha Dvaita, pure non-dualism. And he did so in contrast to what he perceived as the incomplete non-dualism of Shankara's Advaita Vedanta. Why is Shankara's Advaita Vedanta incomplete according to Vallabha's school? Because Shankara posits this second entity called Maya in order to explain the existence of this illusory universe. And because you have Maya alongside Brahman, Vallabha's school of Shuddha Dvaita says Shankara's Advaita is not a pure non-dualism, it's an incomplete non-dualism. The complete non-dualism has to believe in only one entity. And according to Shuddha Dvaita, that one entity is Krishna. Okay. Third key question. What is the relationship between Brahman and the world? Brahman and Jagat. And a problem comes in this context. The problem is, how does the perfect, pure, infinite, sinless Brahman relate to an imperfect, impure, and ever-changing world? The two things seem to be almost opposite. We all know that the world is full of evil. And Brahman, by definition, should be completely devoid of evil. So how can Brahman be related to this world? Advaita Vedanta, once again, has a unique solution to this problem. What Advaita Vedanta says is that ultimately there is no relation between Brahman and the world. We might think there is. From the standpoint of ignorance, there's a relationship. But from the ultimate standpoint, the world turns out to be only an illusory appearance of Brahman. This is what's called Vivartavad in Sanskrit. It's the doctrine that this world is just an illusory appearance of Brahman. Shankara he's very fond of using the example of the rope and the snake, which I'm sure many of you are already familiar with. He likens Brahman to a rope. And this entire world of names and forms to the snake. And so the idea is, if I'm walking on a road and I see something that looks like a snake, I'm going to jump because I'll be afraid. And then when I look more closely, I might find, wait a minute, that was not a snake. It was a rope all along. There was never a snake. Even when I thought there was a snake, there was not a snake. So in the same way, even though there is nothing but Brahman, Shankara says, out of ignorance of Brahman, because we don't know Brahman, we think that there is this world of names and forms, that we are individual souls. But in reality, there was never any world, there was never any individual souls, there was just Brahman all along. This is Shankara's view about the relationship between Brahman and the world. Ultimately, there is no relationship. There's only Brahman, no world. Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya is the standard formula to capture this teaching of Advaita Vedanta. Now, by contrast, Vishishtadvaita of Ramanuja and Bheda Bheda Vedanta subscribe to what's called Parinamavada. the doctrine that Brahman, or at least some aspect of Brahman, actually transforms into the world. According to Vishishtadvaita and Bheda Veda, Brahman is both the efficient cause, which is Nimitta Karana, and the material cause, Upadana Karana, of this world. The efficient cause of the world means that Brahman creates this world, like a potter creates pot out of clay. And Brahman is the material cause of the world. In what sense? In the sense that Brahman itself becomes this world. It's the same material as this world. It's the same material in a different form. Brahman in a different form is the world. This is the material cause. Just as the material cause of clay pots is the clay itself. Okay? So the efficient cause of clay pots is the potter, the human potter, the person who makes the pots. And the material cause of the clay pots is the clay itself. So according to Vishishtadvaita and Bheda Veda, Brahman is both the Nimitta Karana and Upadana Karana of this world. According to Vishishtadvaita, Brahman stands to the world as the soul stands to the body. Shariri. Brahman is the Shariri, and the world is the Sharira. So it's a beautiful metaphor. This entire world can be seen as the body of God. According to Bheda Veda school, Brahman is both different and non-different from the world. This is the meaning of Bheda Veda. Bheda plus Abheda. That's why the school is called Bheda Veda. Brahman is both different from the world and non-different from the world in different respects. And to go into the details will take me too much time. But I'll just mention a couple sub-schools of Bheda Veda. The Shuddha-Dvaita sub-school of Bheda Veda, so Vallabha school, upholds what's called Avikrita Parinamavada. This might sound paradoxical, the doctrine that Brahman transforms into the world while somehow still remaining unchanged. Avikrita means unchanged, Parinama means transformation. So they uphold this view that even though Brahman transforms into the world, it remains unchanged. So this is their view. The Achintya Bheda Veda sub-school of Bheda Veda, this is Chaitanya school, holds that the world is a transformation of Krishna's energy, called Shakti in Sanskrit, which is both different and non-different from him. Madhva Vedanta, this Madhva school, or otherwise known as Dvaita Vedanta, is the only school of Vedanta, the only theistic school of Vedanta that rejects Parinamavada. He says Brahman does not transform into this world. According to Madhva Vedanta, there is a fundamental ontological difference, what he calls Bheda, between many different things, between Brahman and the world, between different individual souls and many other things. And therefore, Brahman is the efficient, the Nimitta Karana, but not the Upadana Karana, but not the material cause of the world. Why does he say this? One of the main reasons is because he is afraid that if Brahman is the material cause of the world, then all of the evil qualities and negative qualities of this world somehow get connected with God. So that's why he says, no, God cannot be the material cause of the world. God is perfect. So God cannot be the material cause of an imperfect world full of sin. So he says Brahman is the efficient cause, but not the material cause. But what Madhva Vedanta shares with all of the other theistic Vedantic schools is the view that Brahman alone is independent, svatantra, while the world is entirely dependent upon Brahman for its existence and preservation. So all of these different theistic schools of Vedanta agree that this world cannot exist separately from Brahman. It has dependent existence. This is something that they all agree on. But the exact details of how they understand the relationship between Brahman and the world differ in subtle ways. Fourth question. What is the relationship between Brahman and the individual soul, the jiva? According to Advaita Vedanta, the jiva, the individual soul, is completely identical with Brahman, but appears to be a limited entity separate from Brahman because it is associated with an unreal limiting adjunct. The Sanskrit term which Shankara uses is upadhi. So I am Brahman, but because I am ignorant, I superimpose an upadhi, a limiting adjunct of jivatva onto myself, and I think of myself as an individual soul. And that's the case for everybody who's ignorant. This is Advaita Vedanta's view, but from the ultimate standpoint, from the Paramatma standpoint, there is no individual jiva. The jiva is Brahman. According to all the schools of Bheda Veda, Brahman is both different and non-different from Jivas. Again, this is why their school is called Bheda Bheda. Bheda plus Abheda. Because Brahman is on the one hand different from the individual souls, and Brahman is non-different from the individual souls. And they use some interesting metaphors to explain how this can be true. Both of these things can be true at the same time, difference and non-difference. They say that Brahman relates to Jivas as the whole relates to its parts, like fire and its sparks, and the ocean and its waves. So think about an ocean and its waves. In one sense, the waves are non-different from the ocean, the same water. In another sense, the wave is different from the ocean because the ocean is vast and infinite, and the wave is just one particular name and form. So you see how they use these metaphors to explain how Brahman can be both different and non-different from Jivas at the same time. Bhaskara was the founder of this Aupadika Bheda Veda school of Vedanta. It's a very old school of Bheda Veda. And according to Bhaskara, the Jiva is in essence identical with Brahman. So this is similar to Shankara's Advaita Vedanta in some ways, but different in other ways. But that Jiva, even though it's identical with Brahman, becomes limited and subject to suffering when associated with upadhis, limiting adjuncts. So notice, you might think this is very similar to Shankara's view. How is it different? But Bhaskara, the key difference is that Bhaskara takes these upadhis to be real, while Shankara takes them to be unreal. This is the key difference between Bhaskara's Aupadika Bheda Veda school and Shankara's Advaita Vedanta. According to Vishishtadvaita Vedanta, Jivas, like the world, relate to Brahman as the body stands to its soul, with the former being intimately connected with, yet entirely dependent on, the latter. So Jivas themselves, each of us as individual souls, can also be seen as the body of Brahman. And the soul, of course, is Brahman. Ramanuja also uses the terms Amcha and Amchi, that these different jivas are portions of Brahman. According to Madhva Vedanta, jivas are what he calls pratibimbas of Brahman, reflections of Brahman, but not reflections in the sense of being an illusion, anything like that. You might think that pratibimba is also used in Shankara's school, but he's using it in a very, very different sense. He was very vicious in attacking Shankara's school, so he would not adopt Advaita's doctrine. He claimed that jivas are reflections of Brahman in a very technical sense, that these jivas depend entirely on Brahman for their existence, and that these jivas remain eternally different from Brahman. In this technical sense, jivas are considered to be reflections of Brahman, according to Madhva Vedanta. And finally, what is the state of salvation according to the different schools of Vedanta? Most schools of Vedanta conceive salvation as mukti, liberation from the cycle of birth and death, liberation from rebirth. As I pointed out, they all agree on this. According to Achintya Bheda Bheda Vedanta, however, the school founded by Chaitanya, the supreme goal is not mukti, it's not liberation from rebirth, but bhakti, the supreme love of Krishna, which nonetheless entails mukti as an incidental byproduct, tuchya phala. It's not that lovers of Krishna will not attain mukti. They will, of course, get mukti, but as a kind of byproduct, like a side effect of bhakti. But Vedantic schools differ on two key questions relating to salvation. Number one, what is the precise nature of salvation? And number two, is it possible to attain jivan mukti, which means the attainment of liberation while still in this physical body, while still living in the physical body? So let's take these questions one at a time. Question one, what is the nature of salvation according to these different schools? According to two schools of Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta and Aupadika Bheda Vedanta, no sense of individuality remains in the liberated state. I don't remain as an individual soul in the state of salvation, nor do you, nor do you, nor do you. There's no individuality left. Only according to these two schools, Aupadika Bheda Veda and Advaita Vedanta. All that remains is Brahman itself, and no individual. However, all of the other Vedantic schools maintain that individuality remains even in the liberated state. There are still individual souls in the state of salvation. For most theistic schools of Vedanta, Salvation consists in residing eternally in a super terrestrial realm, such as Vaikuntha Loka. There are many different terms for this. Goloka. And the individual, the liberated soul resides in this higher loka with a non-physical body made of Shuddha Sattva, pure Sattva, blissfully serving and communing with the personal God. So it's a kind of heaven, an eternal heaven. This is the understanding of salvation according to most theistic schools of Vedanta. Now, the second question. Is Jivan Mukti possible? Is it possible to attain Mukti while still in the physical body? Now, what is Advaita Vedanta's view? It's a little bit complicated. Advaita Vedanta explicitly accepts the possibility of Jivan Mukti because the scriptures say again and again that it seems to be possible to attain liberation while in the physical body. So Advaita Vedanta, because they accept Upanishad, Bhagavad Gita, Brahma Sutta, they have to accept the idea of Jivan Mukti. But the problem is that its world-negating metaphysics makes it difficult to reconcile its philosophy with the concept of Jivan Mukti. What do I mean? Remember that Shankara distinguishes two standpoints. And he says that only from the empirical standpoint, the Vyavaharika standpoint, is this world real. But from the ultimate standpoint, this world does not exist. It's just a product of ignorance. So now let's look at the first bullet point. According to Shankara's school, this world, this entire world of names and forms, and our embodied existence, the physical body itself, are products of ignorance, avidya. So the liberating knowledge of Brahman, when we attain knowledge of Brahman, remember, knowledge of Brahman means the removal of ignorance. Now, if you remove ignorance, then the product of ignorance should also disappear. And that means that this world should also disappear because the world is the product of ignorance. So the problem is that the removal of ignorance seems to be incompatible with continued bodily existence because bodily existence itself is the product of ignorance, which is destroyed when you attain knowledge of Brahman. This is the logic, this is the difficulty, the philosophical difficulty with maintaining Jivan Mukti from the standpoint of Advaita Vedanta. So now, the thing to keep in mind is that many Advaita Vedantins themselves, many great thinkers like Madhusudana Saraswati and many others, Chitsuka, after Shankara, they understood this problem. So what they claimed is that even the Jivan Mukta has what they call a trace of ignorance, avidya lesha, which is responsible for the prarabdha karma, the karma that is not yet fructified, that sustains the physical body. So even they say that the Jivan Mukta is not fully liberated because he has a trace of ignorance. You see, why do they have to say this? Because of this philosophical problem. Because if a person is fully liberated, he cannot inhabit the physical body. Because the physical body itself is a product of ignorance. And if you have completely eradicated ignorance, there can be no physical body, there can be no world. Okay? If you're interested in details on this issue, this very interesting issue of how do Advaita Vedantins try to justify Jivan Mukti, please look at Lance Nelson's scholarly article, Living Liberation in Shankara and Classical Advaita, published in 1996. It's a very nice article. Now, non-Advaitic schools of Vedanta adopt a variety of stances toward Jivan Mukti. According to Vishishtadvaita and Nimbarkar's Svabhavika Bheda Veda school, Jivan Mukti is not possible at all. Ramanuja says it's not possible to attain Jivan Mukti. Nimbarka also says the same thing. Nonetheless, Vishishtadvaitins do accept the possibility of attaining the state of a Sthita Prajna, whose liberation is assured after death. So Sthita Prajna in Bhagavad Gita chapter 2, Ramanuja is very happy to accept all of these, the possibility of attaining the state of Sthita Prajna. But the full liberation you can only get after you leave the physical body. Similarly, Madhva rejects the possibility of Jivan Mukti, but he accepts the possibility of attaining the direct knowledge of God, Aparoksha Jnana, which is necessary for attaining full liberation after death. However, things get a little bit complicated with Madhva Vedanta because a later follower of Madhva named Vyasatirtha equates Aparoksha Jnana with Jivan Mukti. He says that, but what Madhva calls Aparoksha Jnana is Jivan Mukti. Even though Madhva did not call Aparoksha Jnana Jivan Mukti, this later follower of Vyasatirtha equates the two. So it's a little bit complicated. Sometimes you'll find that different followers of the same school sometimes may disagree with each other on certain minor issues like this. And followers of Achinta Bheda Bheda Vedanta fully accept the possibility of Jivan Mukti. So just to give you one example, Rupa Goswami's Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu is the famous text in the Vaishnava school. The Jivan Mukta is one whose activities are performed with body, mind, and speech in servitude to Hari. Okay. Now, the final issue I wanted to discuss, which is very important, because many of us are sadhakas, and we want to know how is all this dry philosophy related to spiritual practice. So, what is the scheme of spiritual practices according to the different schools of Vedanta? Since the different schools of Vedanta hold different conceptions of Brahman and salvation, they also differ on which spiritual practices lead to salvation and the relative priority of these practices. Although many Vedantic schools use the same terms to refer to certain types of spiritual practice, you'll find that all of these schools are referring to Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Dhyana Yoga, sometimes Raja Yoga, or simply Yoga. These schools define these practices in different ways. So for instance, what Ramanuja means by Jnana Yoga is not what Shankara school means by Jnana Yoga. Many people don't know this, but that's an important thing to keep in mind. So this is what I just want to give you an example. So Jnana Yoga, what does Advaita Vedanta mean by Jnana Yoga, and what does Vishita Advaita mean by Jnana Yoga? According to Advaita Vedanta, Jnana Yoga is a practice involving reflection on Upanishadic statements about the identity of the individual soul with non-dual Brahman, and discrimination between Brahman and everything else. Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana, you hear the Mahavakyas, Tattvam Asi, you reflect on them, and then you try to internalize and practice the teaching to the best of your ability, and then you'll attain knowledge of Brahman. This is Jnana Yoga according to Shankara school. What is Jnana Yoga according to Ramanuja's school of Vishishtadvaita Vedanta? It's the practice of meditating on your own eternal individual soul. Meditate on your true nature as an eternal soul. And also discriminating between the soul, that eternal soul, and the body-mind concept. So this is Jnana Yoga according to Vishishtadvaita Vedanta. Notice that they're not the same thing. These are very different practices. Now, let's first discuss the scheme of spiritual practices according to Shankara's school of Advaita Vedanta. According to his school, Jnana Yoga is the only direct path to liberation. Karma Yoga and Bhakti Yoga lead indirectly to liberation, according to Shankara, by purifying and concentrating the mind, thereby making one eligible to practice Jnana Yoga, which alone leads to liberation. So Shankara school accepts Karma Yoga and Bhakti Yoga as preparatory disciplines for purifying and concentrating the mind, but at some point you have to stop practicing Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and just practice Jnana Yoga, and only then can you attain liberation. And Shankara also rejects the doctrine of Jnana Karma Samuchaya. He says that Karma Yoga and Jnana Yoga cannot be practiced at the same time, since they are meant for different grades of spiritual aspirants. So according to Shankara, this is how I would put his scheme in the form of a diagram. Through the combined practice of Karma Yoga and Bhakti Yoga, we attain purity of mind and concentration of mind. Then we become eligible to practice Jnana Yoga. And it's through the practice of Jnana Yoga that we attain salvation, which consists in moksha, liberation from rebirth through knowledge of non-dual Brahman. So this is Shankara's view. What about Bheda Bheda Vedanta? In contrast to Advaita Vedanta, many Bheda Bheda schools and Visita Advaita Vedanta of Ramanuja advocate a combination of Jnana Yoga and Karma Yoga at the same time. This is what they call Jnana Karma Samuchaya. Within the Bheda Bheda tradition, there are a number of different views concerning spiritual practice. So we can't make generalizations about Bheda Bheda. We have to look at the sub-schools of Bheda Bheda. Bhaskara's Aupadika Bheda Bheda give no importance at all to Bhakti Yoga. It was not a Bhakti school, okay? But it's a theistic school, but not a Bhakti school. By contrast, Chaitanya's Achinta Bheda Bheda school of Vedanta maintains that Bhakti Yoga alone leads to the highest salvation. Bhakti Yoga is the highest practice, while other practices like Jnana Yoga and Karma Yoga can be helpful at a preliminary stage, but are by no means necessary. Okay. And now let's look at Vishishtadvaita Vedanta. According to Ramanuja school, the simultaneous practice of Karma Yoga and Jnana Yoga in a devotional spirit eventually culminates in the spiritual realization of one's eternal soul and its utter dependence on God. This is the spiritual realization which Ramanuja calls Atma Avalokana, the realization of your Atman in the sense of your true nature as an individual soul, which in turn makes one eligible to practice Bhakti Yoga, which consists in constant meditative recollection of God. This is Upasana, according to Ramanuja. Bhakti Yoga means constantly thinking of God, which by God's grace leads to salvation, knowledge of Vishnu, Narayana, and ultimately after leaving the physical body, you reside in Vishnu Loka, Vaikuntha Loka with Krishna, with Vishnu. So, in the form of a diagram, according to Ramanuja, through the joint practice of Karma Yoga and Jnana Yoga, you purify your mind, and then you finally realize your true nature as an eternal individual soul. And only after you realize your true nature as an individual soul can you feel real bhakti for God. And then naturally you'll feel that you'll want to think about God all the time. And that's when you're eligible to practice Bhakti Yoga, which according to Ramanuja is the highest spiritual practice. And it's through the practice of Bhakti Yoga that you can attain the highest goal of life, which is residing in Vaikuntha Loka with Vishnu and serving him and worshipping him in a loving relationship for an eternity. Now, I wanted to mention one final question. There are just 2 more slides remaining. Then I would love to hear from you. Is God's grace necessary for salvation? Devotional schools of Vedanta like Vishittadvaita, Shuddhadvaita, Achinta Bheda Veda, and Madhva Vedanta, all of these schools strongly insist on the necessity of God's grace for attaining salvation. Without God's grace, you cannot attain salvation. Other schools of Vedanta, such as Bhaskara's Aupadika Bheda Veda, do not emphasize God's grace at all. It plays no role in their philosophy. Now, what about Advaita Vedanta? While it is often assumed that Advaita Vedanta, Shankara school, accords no importance to God's grace, this is the kind of common view. Shankara, in fact, at numerous places in his commentary on the Brahma Sutra, explicitly states that the grace of God, of the personal God, Ishvara, is necessary for liberation. So, to give you one example, in his commentary on Brahma Sutra 2.3.41, Shankaracharya says, liberation results from knowledge that is caused by the grace of God. So this is actually very interesting that even Shankara says that God's grace is necessary for the knowledge of Brahma. And finally, I wanted to point out one thing is that, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes even within a particular school of Vedanta, there may be some differences. And in the case of Ramanuja's school of Vishittadvaita Vedanta, after Ramanuja's time, 2 different sects or sub-schools emerged with different answers to the question of, to what extent is God's grace necessary for salvation? Both of them claim that God's grace is necessary for salvation, but they also differ in a certain way. The Tenkalai sub-school of Vishittadvaita Vedanta believes that God's grace alone is sufficient for salvation. We don't have to do anything else. It's just by God's grace that we attain salvation. The Vadakalai sub-school of Vedanta, of Vishittadvaita Vedanta, holds that God's grace must be combined with self-effort to achieve salvation. And in the debates between these 2 different sub-schools of Vishittadvaita, Tenkalai, Vadakalai, they use these 2 metaphors, okay, which were also used later by Sri Ramakrishna to describe their respective views. So the Tenkalai sub-school uses the metaphor of a kitten being carried by the mother cat. So the baby kitten will be kept in the mouth of the mother cat. The baby kitten does nothing, and it says nothing. It just says mew mew, and the mother cat will take it in its mouth and drop it wherever it wants. So it's complete surrender to God. God's grace alone is sufficient. Let God take care of me. The Vadakalai sub-school says, by contrast, it uses the metaphor of a baby monkey, not baby kitten, but baby monkey. The baby monkey is the one who holds on for dear life to the father monkey. And the father monkey will be hopping from branch to branch of a tree. But the moment that the baby monkey lets go of its grip, it'll be dashed to the ground and killed. So this is the metaphor for self-effort. The idea is that you also have to combine self-effort. You can't just depend on God's grace. You're like the baby monkey. So there are these interesting debates even within a particular school of Vedanta about issues like, is God's grace alone necessary for salvation, and many other issues. Thank you for listening, and now I'd love to hear from you.
Most Venerable Swami Medhanand ji, आपको प्रणाम. I heard about Ahituki Bhakti in Chaitanya school. I want to know something from you, Maharaj ji.
But I think you're asking about Ahituki Bhakti in Chaitanya school. So it just means love for love's sake. You don't want anything from God. You just want to have pure love for God, for love's sake. This is Ahituki Bhakti. Ahetu means reason, a cause, some reason. Most people, they have some reason to love God. I want liberation. I want God to cure my son. I want God to make sure that my daughter gets good grades on her exam. Ahituka Bhakti means you love for love's sake. That's the basic idea. I think that was your question, but unless I'm wrong. Yeah, thank you.
स्वामी जी नमस्कार.
Namaste.
मेरा नाम डॉक्टर पंकज गुप्ता है and I run one center in one university in Delhi. And my question is that why to bother about liberation when we talk about Aham Brahmasmi Tattvamasi? And God also, some people believe, is more like a cause and effect relation. You are not living life fully in this moment and you're thinking about liberation. Is it not like postponing the happiness for tomorrow, which nobody has seen? So I'm intrigued by this question. Is it not spirituality living in this moment and not bothering at all about liberation or that any kind of world which can be called about heaven or Jannat or whatever? So I'd like to hear your views on that. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. It's an interesting question. I mean, so the thing is, according to Hinduism, this spiritual journey is a journey of many lives. It's not a journey of one life. And so you'll find that different people are at different stages in the spiritual journey. And so there are some people who say, I don't care about liberation. I just want to live my life now. And that's perfectly fine. Hinduism says that's fine. Liberation is not for you in this life. But the idea is, and this is accepted by all Vedantic schools, eventually, after a certain number of lives, you're going to feel the urge that you want something beyond this world, something more than this world can give. You know, Sri Aurobindo, in his epic poem, Savitri, I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, one of the chapters begins with this beautiful statement, all is too little that this world can give. All is too little that this world can give. That insight comes very late for many people. For most people in the world right now, they're not interested in any kind of higher reality. But there's a small minority of people who just feel a spiritual urge. That's because of Purva Janma Samskaras. That's because of latent mental impressions from previous birth. They've done sadhana in previous birth, which gives them that spiritual urge in this life. And that's what leads them to seek something beyond this world. So this is a kind of short answer to your question, I hope.
Namaskar, Swamiji. Just wanted to ask you, there was this instance that where you mentioned that Advaita Vedanta believes in there is no different entity as God or a Jiva. They're the same. But Adi Shankaracharya ji has quoted in Brahma Sutra that even God's grace is necessary. So isn't it contradictory, and how do we understand that?
Right. Okay, that's a good question. So the way I understand it is that he distinguishes these two levels of reality, the Vyavaharika and the Paramatika standpoints. So one way to explain all his statements about God's grace being necessary is that he's speaking from the empirical standpoint, the Vyavaharika standpoint. From the standpoint of ignorance, this world is real, the personal God is real, individual souls are real. So from that standpoint, you can say that without the grace of this ultimately unreal God, we cannot attain salvation. So to give you a metaphor, I'm stuck in a dream, and my goal is to wake up from the dream. So somebody can say, the guru in your dream, you have to go to this dream guru, you have to learn from this dream guru, you have to do dream spiritual practices in order to wake up from the dream. So in that sense, God's grace itself is part of the dream, but it's necessary to wake you up from the dream. I hope that clarifies it.
One more question I had. Knowing about different Vedantic schools and how do I know where I stand and what do I follow? Because life is a very dynamic process, and the mind also changes, and the way of dealing with. Sometimes I believe in God, sometimes I feel everything is one. So, how do I know where do I fall, and do I really need to think about it?
Yeah, I think it just requires soul searching and honesty, and what's called honest self-assessment. Ask yourself, what are your deepest leanings? Do you lean toward a more impersonal understanding of ultimate reality, like along the lines of Advaita Vedanta? You don't like to think so much about God, whether God exists, and all these things. You don't care for prayer and worship and all those things, but you have more of an intellectual bent of mind, and you like to think of yourself as Sakshi, as Brahman, then Advaita Vedanta could be for you. If you're naturally a bhakta, if you have naturally devotional leanings, then you can choose one of the devotional schools of Vedanta. And another thing, which I didn't mention in this lecture because it didn't seem like it would be completely relevant here, is, I'm in a particular tradition, the Ramakrishna Vivekananda tradition. And if you're interested, you can look at some of my lectures on YouTube. But basically, I see our tradition. There are certain modern traditions which try to harmonize the different schools of Vedanta. You don't have to take sides. You don't have to say, I'm a Ramanujite or a Madhvaite. The Ramakrishna Vivekananda tradition says they're all right in different ways, because the ultimate reality is both Nirguna and Saguna. But unlike schools like Chaitanya school, which still has a hierarchy saying that the highest reality and the greatest reality is Krishna, Nirguna Brahman is the lower reality, it's less important. Our school, the Ramakrishna Vivekananda school, says that both are equally valuable. It's a matter of temperament. Ramakrishna would use the metaphor of eating sugar or becoming sugar. He says bhaktas like to eat sugar. Advaitins want to become sugar. There's no higher and lower. There's no greater or lesser. There's just a matter of difference in temperament. So this is also an approach. And in terms of spiritual practices, unlike the traditional Vedantic schools, which always have a hierarchy, one yoga is higher than the other one, Sri Ramakrishna and Vivekananda say that all of the four yogas are equally valuable, equally capable of taking you to salvation. There's no hierarchy there. So that's the view that I prefer, for instance. But anyway, so you can take your pick and decide for yourself. Thank you.
What is that state now where you feel Jivan Mukta?
Well, yeah, okay. But the problem is every school will explain it in different ways. That's the problem. So, as I said, some schools of Vedanta simply do not accept the possibility of Jivan Mukti. Ramanujan says it's not possible. Madhva says it's not possible. And why? The idea is because they conceive of salvation in a higher loka, right? So, so long as you're in this physical body, you are not in that higher loka, in that eternal heaven. So there's a kind of logical difficulty with accepting Jivan Mukti in these schools. Advaita Vedanta, as I already mentioned, is problematic because they accept Jivan Mukti, but they have difficulty justifying, because this physical body itself is a product of ignorance. So if you remove all ignorance through knowledge of Brahman, how can this world remain? So ultimately they have to posit avidya lesha even in the so-called Jivan Mukta. Even the person who is liberated in this life has a trace of ignorance. But then why should we call him a Jivan Mukta? You get that problem in Advaita Vedanta. So what some bhakti schools do, like Achinta Bheda Veda, is they redefine Jivan Mukti in a different way. They say that the Jivan Mukta is somebody who is a perfect bhakta of God, of Krishna. The perfect devotee of God is a Jivan Mukta. You can be a perfect devotee while in the physical body, so you don't run into these philosophical difficulties. You see, you're not in Vaikuntha Loka, you're not in Goloka, but you're still a perfect bhakta. And so if you can redefine Jivan Mukti in a sort of less ambitious and glorious way, then you're able to explain Jivan Mukti also. So anyway, it's difficult to give you a one-size-fits-all answer. Every school of Vedanta has a different answer to this question. What is Jivan Mukti? Is Jivan Mukti possible? Yeah, so thank you for that question.
Pranam Swamiji. I wanted to ask one question. There was one slide that you mentioned that this Advaita Vedanta is the only Vedantic school which holds that all attributes of Brahman is Nirguna, right? And then there was this one other slide in the presentation which said that for your Advaita Vedanta, you need to follow, you need to follow Jnana Yoga. So if Advaita Vedanta believes in Nirguna, then what is there to know? What is Jnana Yoga then? When there is no gun related to the reality. What is Gyan then?
Okay, now I can read it. When in Advaita Vedanta Brahman is Nirguna, then what is there to know for Jnana Yoga? So the idea is, the goal of life according to Advaita Vedanta is to know Nirguna Brahman. It is to know that in your Swarupa, your true essence, you are none other than that. You are identical to Nirguna Brahman, which is non-dual pure consciousness. And it's only through Jnana Yoga that you can attain this knowledge of Brahman. That's the basic idea. Thank you. Okay, in one of the Vedanta schools, there's written that Bhakti to Krishna will lead to mukti or salvation. Yeah, that's correct. But what's the question?
That according to Vedanta, it will lead to salvation, and there are so many religions. So what about the other religions? Right? Is that your question? If Vedanta alone will lead to salvation,
oh, I see.
So what about the other religions? Where will they lead us to?
Right. Oh, okay, right. That's a good question. Yeah. So the thing is, these traditional schools of Vedanta, they didn't usually talk about non-Hindu religions. But we can gather that they would not say that the practice of other religions will lead to the highest goal of salvation. I think that what they would say is something along the lines of, they would bring in rebirth and say that in this life they were born Christian, but in a future life they may be born as a Hindu if they're fortunate enough, and then they have to practice our path, and then finally they'll attain salvation. So there's a lot of that kind of rigidity and narrowness, unfortunately. And as I said, the tradition I belong to is very different, because we teach the harmony of all the religions, and that through any of the religions you can attain the same goal. But that's not a doctrine that was held by the traditional schools of Vedanta, in part because they were not exposed to religions other than Hinduism. That's part of the reason, I think.
Swamiji, I just wanted to know, can you hear me?
Yeah, but please speak slowly and clearly.
Okay.
Yeah.
It is believed that the land on which we are living now, Prithvi that we call, this is supposed to be the best in all the lokas possible. Right? Heaven has everything that is stationary. It would not change. So we are blessed with seasons. We are blessed with growth. We are blessed with aging. We are blessed with different thoughts, different spiritual values, different religions, and so many things that are of bliss on earth. So would you be able to tell me, if I want to think about nirvana, is there any hierarchy that I should follow? That I must appreciate these worldly things first, then get into the theory of karma, wherein I have to do certain karma and return to the society, and then comes the stage where I can talk about renunciation. Is it something like that?
Okay, I was understanding you until the end when the sound got muffled again, but I think I understand the gist of your question. But I wanted to first disagree with something you said in the beginning. I think you said that this world is the best of all lokas. I don't think that these traditional schools of Vedanta would agree. Shankara will say that, forget about the best of all lokas, there are no lokas. So the problem is that we're stuck in this world, and the solution is to get out of this world and to realize that this world never existed. So that's one traditional school. The Bhakti schools, what they say is this is not at all the best loka. The best loka is out there. Up there, Vaikuntha Loka or Goloka. We are in a state of radical ignorance right now. And we suffer because of that. And the goal is to remain in this eternal loka. This is the perishable loka, and we're stuck in these perishable physical bodies. We're subject to all sorts of suffering and anxieties and this and that. We might have our little moments of grace, but that's it in this otherwise miserable life. This seems to be the standpoint of all the Vedantic schools. That's one thing. And then I think you asked whether these schools teach that, you have to renounce from the beginning. No, they don't teach that. That's why, I'm sure you guys are aware of this, but in Hinduism, there's the four purusharthas, the four values of life. Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. Dharma, the foundation of everything, of all activity and behavior in this world is dharma, which means you have to act on an ethical basis. But once you have that foundation of dharma, it's perfectly legitimate to pursue kama and artha, sensuous desires, pleasures, and at the same time wealth, but on a dharmic basis. At the same time, what Hinduism insists on, and what all these schools of Vedanta insist on, is that these are not the highest values in life. These are not the highest goals. The highest goal is moksha. And if you bring in the doctrine of rebirth, the fact that we have many, many lives, what in practice it turns out that 99% of people, 99.999 something percent of people, are stuck at the dharma artha kama level. That's why to them, it's just, they don't even think about the very idea of liberation. It's not appealing to them. It's not, why bother? This is what comes into the minds of most people. Let me marry and have a nice time. I'll think about that in a future birth. And then the idea is that after many more lives of spiritual development, then they come around to appreciating the value of moksha. And then they turn to spiritual practice. So this is how I see Hindus answering that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Swamiji. Thank you for your, I know it is very early time and you made this special time for us. Thank you so much, Swamiji. It must be very early for him there. Pranam, Swamiji. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Richa, for inviting me. Take care.
Pranam.
Hari Om. Hari Om.